A Lakota chief's daughter was drowning. A mute runaway dove in and gained a father at last. The rope was what I remember first. Not the water, not the sound of it, and there was sound more than you'd think. The river loud as a freight run in that canyon stretch where the Cheyenne Fork turns back on itself. Not the cold, though it was the kind of cold that takes the air out of you before you even hit the surface. The rope, coiled at my saddle horn the way I always kept it, the way old Garver showed me when I was 14 and didn't know a half hitch from a hangman's, and my hand was on it before I'd made any decision at all. The hand knew. The rest of me was still standing on the bank trying to understand what I was seeing. A girl in the water. Not a girl, a woman though young. She'd gone in sideways, that was clear from the way she was turning, no control in it, fighting the current with her arms but angling wrong, the way people do, when they've never learned that you don't fight a river current straight on, you work across it. She had a horse somewhere upstream. I could see the animal on the far bank already, standing with its head low and blowing hard, and between her and that horse was maybe 40 yards of the meanest water the Cheyenne Fork had to offer in the spring thaw. I threw the rope before I thought about what I was throwing it to. It landed wrong, too far left. I hauled it back, and in those 3 or 4 seconds she went under once, came up, went under again. The second throw was better, not good, but better, and she caught it. Both hands, no grace to it, pure desperation. I had the other end dally to the horn, and I backed my horse and let the animal do the work, because I'd have been dragged in on my own. She came out of the water in stages. First her head, then her shoulders, then the rest of her dragging over the gravel bar at the edge of the ford like something the river didn't want to keep. I was off my horse and down the bank before she'd stopped moving. She was alive, coughing hard on her hands and knees in the gravel, hair loose and plastered flat, the kind of shaking that starts in your chest and works outward. I crouched beside her. I didn't touch her, it didn't seem like the right thing. A stranger's hands on a woman who'd just come that close to drowning, and I didn't say anything. I couldn't, of course, hadn't been able to for 8 years. What I did was get my coat off and put it on the ground next to her, folded flat, not draped over her because that would have been presuming, just there if she wanted it. Then I stood back a step and let her breathe. She looked at me eventually. Dark eyes, the kind that don't give much unless they choose to. She was taking stock of me, I could feel it, the way you take stock of a threat you're not sure is still a threat. I held my hands open at my sides. There wasn't much else I could do. She said something in Lakota. I don't know what. I shook my head. She switched to English. You pulled me out. I nodded. She waited for more. When none came, she looked at me differently, not suspicious, calibrating. You don't speak. I touched my throat, shook my head again. She was quiet a moment. Then she picked up the coat and put it around her shoulders without making anything of it, one decisive motion, and got to her feet. She was steadier than she had any right to be. She looked at the river, then at me. My horse crossed before I did. The bank gave way. I nodded like I understood, which I did. The spring thaw makes the banks soft, deceptive. Looks solid, drops you. I'm Chayton's daughter, she said. Wombly Wynn. I didn't know that name then. I would. My name is Eli Cord, and I had been running for 11 years by the time I fished Wombly Wynn out of the Cheyenne Fork. Not running from the law, though there are men who'd tell you different and they'd be half right. Running from the version of myself that got made in the years after I lost my voice, the version that had decided the only safe way to live was to keep moving, keep quiet in 2 senses of the word, never stay anywhere long enough to owe or be owed. A man who can't speak learns to make himself small. Not in body, I'm a big man, always was, but in presence. You learn to slip in and out of towns, camps, settlements, without leaving a mark. You learn that if you don't talk, people fill the silence with whatever they've already decided about you, and most of what they decide isn't good, so you get clear before it hardens into something you have to answer for. I lost my voice in a fire. I was 22. I'll tell you the shape of it. There was a barn, there were 3 horses still inside, and there was a man who didn't deserve my help but got it anyway because I was young enough to think heroism was its own argument. I got 2 of the horses out, not the third, and when I breathed in what I breathed in, something in my throat closed up and never opened again. The doctor in Laramie said the tissue scarred over, said I might get some sound back, a whisper at least. It's been 30 years and I've got nothing. The man whose barn it was didn't thank me. He told people I'd started the fire. He had reasons, money reasons, the kind that require a story, and I had no way to argue back, no voice to put my version of events in anyone's ear. So I left, and I kept leaving. Town to town, job to job, fence work, cattle drives, scouting for outfits that needed a man who could read country better than most and didn't ask for conversation. I was good at what I did. I was good at a lot of things. But being good at things, it turns out, only matters to people who are watching, and I'd made sure for 11 years that nobody was. I was 33 when I pulled Wombly Win out of that river. She was, I learned later, 26. She'd come down alone to check the ford, which the women were apparently not supposed to do, not that particular ford, not in spring, and the bank had given way exactly as she'd said. Her horse, a gray with a white blaze, was now on the far side looking unconcerned. Mine was a raw-boned sorrel I called Wick, bad-tempered and loyal, the best horse I ever owned. I got Wombly Win across the ford on Wick, she rode. I led him through at the narrow, shallow spot 100 yards upstream, and on the other side she mounted her gray and looked at me with those level, measuring eyes. "You're heading north," she said. I tipped my head, more or less. "The camp is 3 miles, she said. "Come." It wasn't quite an invitation. It was closer to a fact stated plainly. "You're going north, the camp is 3 miles north, therefore you're coming to camp." There was no argument in it and no warmth, just a clean logic, and I followed her because I didn't have a better direction, and because something in the way she sat that horse told me this wasn't a woman who said things she didn't mean. The camp was bigger than I'd expected. I'd been on the edge of Lakota territory for 3 weeks, moving through it the way I moved through everything, carefully, without announcement, reading the land for signs of how welcome or unwelcome I was. I wasn't hostile to them and they weren't to me, mostly because I hadn't given anyone a reason. But riding into the camp proper was something else. 30 or 40 lodges on a flat benchland above the creek, cook fires going, horses on the picket line at the north end, children who stopped and stared the way children do. Wombly Win rode straight to a lodge larger than the others and dismounted. She spoke to a woman outside in Lakota, and the woman looked at me once and went inside. Wombly Win looked back at me. "Wait here," she said. I waited. He came out after a few minutes. I knew him for who he was before anyone told me, not because of the lodge or the way people moved slightly when he appeared, though both of those things were real, because of the way he carried himself. Upright in the way of a man who has carried weight for so long that the weight has become part of his structure. You couldn't remove it now without something collapsing. He was maybe 60, maybe older, gray in his hair, a face that had been in wind and sun for every one of those years. He looked at me the way his daughter had looked at me, that same calibrating patience, and then he spoke to her. She answered. I caught my name. She'd asked me my name at the ford, and I'd written it in the dust with a stick, and I heard it come out of her mouth as something close to what it was. Ela, Cord. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, in English that was precise and deliberate, "You pulled my daughter from the water." I nodded. "You did not speak to her." I touched my throat. He watched my hand. "You cannot speak." I shook my head. He was quiet, not the quiet of a man deciding. I don't think he was deciding anything at that point. I think he was observing, putting together what he was seeing into a picture that satisfied him. Then he said, "You will eat with us tonight." Again, not quite an invitation. closer to a statement of how things would be. His name was Chayton. Eagle, it means in Lakota. I didn't find that out for several days. For those first days, he was just the man with the gray-streaked hair and the patient eyes who had, for reasons I didn't understand and didn't ask about, decided I was worth watching. Wanbli Win means eagle woman. I thought about that later, when I knew both their names. Father and daughter both named for the same bird, the same sky animal, the same quality of sight. It seemed right to me. There was something in both of them that reminded me of height, not arrogance, but the perspective that comes from being above the ordinary squabbling of things, seeing the land whole. The first 2 days in that camp I mostly stayed out of the way. There's an art to that, and I'd been practicing it for 11 years. You find a task that needs doing. In this case it was the picket line, which had a section of frayed rope I could replace, and a gate post that had worked loose from the ground, and you do it without making a production of it, and then you move to the next thing. People notice, but they don't quite notice you, and that's the distinction that keeps you safe in a place where you're the stranger. On the third day, one of the young men came and stood near me while I was working on a saddle that had a cracked tree. Not the stirrup leather, the tree itself, which requires taking the whole thing apart, and which most men won't bother with and just buy a new saddle. I'd found wood a straight-grained bit of ash from a deadfall near the creek, and I was shaping it with a draw knife. He watched for a while and then held out his hand, wanting to try. I handed him the knife, positioned his hands, showed him the angle, stepped back. He did it wrong the first pass and right the second. He looked at me. I held up 2 fingers, 2 more passes. He did them. I checked the fit. It was going to work. His name was Motto. He was, I found out later, Wanbli Win's younger brother, 18 years old, and he had the cheerful directness of a young man who hadn't yet learned to be suspicious of the world. He didn't seem bothered that I couldn't talk. He talked enough for both of us. What he told me over the next few days, in the mix of English and gesture and occasional demonstration that we worked out between us. His father was one of the senior chiefs of this band, which had been living in this territory for as long as anyone remembered. The previous winter had been hard: sickness, losses. 3 men who had been good hunters were gone. The band was smaller than it had been. There were pressures from other groups, from settlers moving through, from the army making noises about boundaries. His father was holding things together the way a man holds a cracked vessel together, carefully, with both hands, not dropping it, but aware that it could go at any moment. And Wanbli Win, Motto said, was supposed to marry. A man from a neighboring band, a good man by all accounts, a good match. But she had not agreed to it yet, and their father had not pushed the matter, which was not the ordinary way of things, and Motto said this with a slight frown that told me he didn't quite understand it himself. I filed that away. It wasn't my business. Nothing here was my business technically. I was a stranger who'd been invited to eat and had lingered, doing useful work, which was the only currency I had. But I thought about it. On the 5th day, Chayton came and sat near me in the evening. I'd come to understand by then that this was deliberate. He didn't accidentally end up places. He made choices. Every gesture was a choice, and when he sat down near the fire I'd been using to heat the rivets for the saddle tree, it was because he'd decided to sit there. He didn't speak right away. We sat. The fire was low by then, mostly coals, and the smell of the camp, wood smoke and horse, and the particular dry sweetness of the plains in early summer, sat over everything like a cloth. After a while he said, "You work well." I looked at him. "A man who cannot speak," he said, "learns to say things other ways." I thought about that. I nodded slowly. "My daughter says you knew what to do in the water, not just strength. You knew how to bring someone across a current." I pointed to the sorrel standing at the picket line. Then I made a dragging motion. He understood. The horse did the work, not me. "Still," he said. We were quiet again. An owl called somewhere north of the camp, 2 notes and then silence. I have watched you 5 days, Chaitin said. You do not take what isn't offered. You do not speak when you don't have something to say, a slight pause, a dry tone, which, I understand, is not entirely a choice. I made a sound that might have been a laugh. It came out rough and voiceless, but he understood it. Some men who cannot speak, he said, become angry. The silence makes them mean. I had known those men. I'd been close to one of them in my bad years. You didn't. I looked at the coals. Why, he said. It was a real question, not rhetorical. He wanted to know. I thought about how to answer it without a voice. After a moment I picked up a stick and drew in the dirt beside the fire, a horse, rough but recognizable, and a man beside it. Then I drew the man moving away from the horse, then another horse, then the man again, smaller. Chaitin watched. I kept drawing a simple series of pictures, not skilled but clear enough. The man alone, far from everything, moving, not arriving anywhere. You kept going, he said. I tapped the pictures and nodded. You didn't stop long enough to become that angry man. I thought about it. Then I drew one more thing, a river, the man at the edge, a figure in the water. Until here, Chaitin said. I looked at him. You stopped here. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I looked at the pictures and I couldn't argue with him. Wanbli Win brought me food in the mornings. Not with ceremony, not with anything you could call softness. She set the bowl down near where I was working and walked away, and I ate it and cleaned the bowl and left it where she could find it. That was the whole of the exchange for the first week. Routine, impersonal, the way you water a horse that's earning its keep. The second week she started staying. Not long, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Standing near, watching what I was doing. Once she asked a question about the saddle tree. How did I know which wood to use? I showed her the grain, running my thumb along it, and she ran her thumb the same way and nodded. Another time she sat down on the log near the fire while I was working leather and she spoke. Not to me, exactly, not a conversation she needed anything back from, more like thinking out loud in the presence of someone who wasn't going to interrupt her. She talked about the land, about where the river went after the fork, about a valley 2 days west that she knew well, about the way the grass was wrong this year, too dry too early, which meant the buffalo would move before the usual time. She talked about these things the way a person talks about matters that concern them, without looking for reassurance, just thinking through them in air. I listened. I was good at listening. 11 years of silence makes you good at it if you're paying attention. Once during a pause she looked at me and said, "What was it like before?" I knew what she was asking. I thought for a moment. Then I opened my mouth and made a shape with it, the shape of a word, any word but without sound, just the shape. Then I closed it. She watched that. "You miss it," she said. I held my hand flat and tilted it side to side, somewhat, sometimes. She considered this. Then she said, "My grandfather lost the use of his hand in a fight when he was young. He said for years he felt the hand move when it couldn't. He kept reaching for things that he could not grip." I understood what she was saying, the ghost of the thing. He said eventually, she said, he stopped feeling it, not because he forgot, because he found other ways to grip things. She stood up, picked up the bowl she'd brought and walked back toward the lodges. I sat for a while with that. I should tell you about the trouble, because it came about 3 weeks in, and it was the reason things changed. There were 3 men, drifters, white men, which I'll note only because it matters to what happened, who'd been working the territory as traders, which is what they called themselves. What they were, more accurately, was opportunists of the particular kind that the frontier produces when there's enough open space for a man to reinvent what the rules mean. They'd been through the camp once before I arrived, in the winter, and whatever they'd traded had left Chaitin, and the others with a certain wariness that they didn't explain, but that I could read in the way people's posture changed when the 3 men rode in one afternoon. I was at the picket line with Motto when they arrived. I watched them from there. They were easy to read, the kind of confidence that comes from believing no one in this camp would do anything about whatever they chose to do. They had a wagon with some goods, cloth, tools, items worth something, and they moved through the camp with a familiarity that was slightly too familiar, the kind that's manufactured to feel like it can't be refused. One of them, the biggest one, had his eye on the gray horse, Wombly Wind's horse. I saw him looking at it. I saw him ask Chayton something, and I saw Chayton's answer, a single short phrase and a stillness that meant no, very clearly, and I saw the man look at the horse again as if the no hadn't quite registered. That evening late, I heard something at the picket line. I don't sleep deeply. I don't think I have in 30 years. Some part of me is always listening to the world around me, filling in for what my voice can't do. If I can't call out, I need to hear early. So when I heard the soft footfall at the north end of the line, where the gray was staked, I was up and out before I'd finished thinking about it. It was the big man. He had the gray's lead and was moving quiet and fast, heading for the dark beyond the camp's edge. I was barefoot and I was between him and the dark in about 4 seconds. He didn't see me until I was right there. There's a thing about being a big man who doesn't speak. When you appear in someone's path in the dark, without warning, without a word, no threat, no demands, the other person's mind fills in something worse than anything you might have said. He stopped. He stared. I stood between him and where he was going, and I didn't move. He said some things, loud things, then quiet things. He tried to go around me. I stepped in front of him again. He pulled a knife. I let him see that I wasn't flinching, that I was going to be in his path whether or not he had the knife, and I waited. By then there were others awake. Motto and 2 other young men, and then Chayton, who came last and said one thing in Lakota and then in English. Put it down. The man looked at the people around him and put it down. In the morning they were gone. All 3 of them, wagon and goods and whatever plans they'd come with. Chayton found me at the fire. He didn't say anything about the night before for a moment. Then he said, no knife, no voice, just standing in the way. I lifted a shoulder. That was enough, he said. I nodded. He was quiet for a long time, looking at the coals. Then, a man who stands in the way without needing anyone to see him do it. That is a kind of courage I respect more than most. I didn't know what to do with that. I wasn't used to it. I looked at the fire. Stay, he said, as long as you want to stay. Summer moved in the way it does on the plains, not gradually, but all at once. One morning you wake up and the cold is just gone, and the grass is a different color, and the air has weight to it. I stayed. I kept working. There was always something. The camp had the needs any camp has, and I was useful with my hands in ways that didn't require words. Tack and woodwork and fence, and once a complicated piece of ironwork on a wagon wheel that required me to build a small forge from river stones and a length of iron piping, and work the thing over 2 full days. Motto helped with the bellows and learned most of what I knew about metalwork in those 2 days. He was a fast learner. Smart, the way young men are smart when they haven't yet learned to perform how smart they are. Wombly Wind kept coming in the mornings. The conversations, if you could call them that, got longer. She talked. I listened and answered as I could. Nods, gestures, the occasional word written in dirt or on a scrap of leather with a bit of charcoal. Once I drew her a map of the country I'd come through, showing the river systems west of the territory, and she studied it for a long time and then added to it herself, correcting 2 of the creek branches and marking a pass I hadn't found. She knew that land. Not from maps, she knew it the way you know a thing you've walked and ridden and lived in, with your body as much as your mind. One afternoon she said, "The man my father wants me to marry, his name is Kanghai, he's a good man." I waited. He's from the Oglala band, strong, a good hunter, his family is respected. I was looking at the map between us, not at her. Everyone thinks I should say yes. I looked up. I don't say no, she said. I don't say yes either. I picked up the charcoal stick and wrote slowly, why? She looked at the word for a moment. Because I am not sure I want a life that has already been decided. I wrote, what kind do you want? She was quiet for a long time, then she said, I don't know yet, I thought I would know by now. A pause. My mother died when I was 14, she knew. She always seemed to know exactly what she wanted, what she was for. I watched her and thought I would inherit that, but I didn't. I wrote, maybe you didn't need to inherit it. She read it, what does that mean? I wrote, maybe you find it yourself, not from her. She looked at the words. Then she looked at me, and there was something in that look I hadn't seen from her before, not suspicion, not measurement, but something more direct. Like something had been confirmed, that she'd been keeping as a question. She didn't say anything. She stood up and went back to the lodges, but she left the map. Chayton found me one evening, near the end of summer. The light was the particular amber of late August, the kind that makes everything look like it's sitting in the last moment before dark. He came and sat, deliberately, as always, and for a while neither of us did anything but watch that light work its way across the benchland. He said, you know what my daughter's name means? I touched my throat, then made a gesture he'd learned to read as yes. Eagle Woman, he said. I gave her that name when she was 3 days old. She looked at me the way a newborn doesn't usually look at things, focused still, like she was taking the measure of me. I thought, she will see things from high up. She will see them whole. He was quiet. I have tried not to decide her life for her, he said. Her mother had spirit. Wombly Wynn has it too, differently. A harder spirit maybe, more wind in it. I nodded. I knew what he meant. She talks to you, he said. I looked at him. More than she talks to most people, he said. I've noticed. She talks to you the way a person thinks out loud, not looking for answers, just thinking. I waited. I have a question, he said, and I want you to understand that there is only one right answer, and it is the true one. I held very still. Do you care for my daughter? The light was holding. A hawk crossed it, high up, riding a thermal. I thought about the question for a long time, not about the answer I knew, about how to give it honestly. I picked up a stick and I wrote in the dirt between us, yes. Then I wrote, I didn't plan to. Then I wrote, I don't have a lot to offer. He read all of it. He was quiet for a long while. Do you know what I have watched for 30-some years, he said. Men who had a great deal to offer. Land, horses, standing, strength. And I watched what they did with it. Some of them were good men, many were not. Having much to offer, he said, has very little to do with what a man is. I looked at the words in the dirt. You have no voice, he said. You came here with a rope and a horse and whatever you carry in those hands. And in this camp you have been the same man every single day. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. I didn't know what to say to that. I couldn't say anything anyway. But he seemed to know what my silence contained, because he sat for a moment longer and then got up, and before he walked away he put his hand on my shoulder, once, brief, the weight of it particular and deliberate, and walked back toward the lodges. I sat there until the light was gone. I want to tell you about one morning near the end of August, because it's the one I come back to most. Wombly Wynn came at the usual time. I was up early. I was always up early, and I'd been watching the creek from a low bank just east of the camp where a cottonwood had come down in the spring and left a good sitting place, the trunk smooth and dry and just the right height. She found me there and she sat beside me, not at the end of the trunk but in the middle of it, close, and she didn't say anything for a while. The creek was low by then, late summer low, the stones showing through. You could hear it working its way around them, not loud, not the freight-run sound of the spring thaw, but conversational, quiet and ongoing. She said, I told Kanghai no. I looked at her. I sent word 3 days ago. My father knows. I was very still. I'm not telling you this so that you'll feel obligated, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you because you should know, because she started again. Because when I think about things, you're in my thoughts. You've been in my thoughts since the ford, and I think you should know that. I turned to face her. She was looking at the creek, her jaw set the way it set when she'd made a decision that she was standing behind. I took her hand, not dramatically, just took it and held it in mine. Her hand was smaller than mine, but the grip she returned was firm, deliberate, the same quality she brought to everything. She looked down at our hands. Then she looked up at me, and the set of her jaw eased just slightly, and she let out a breath. I held on. We sat like that for a long while, the creek making its argument to the stones, the August light coming up through the cottonwoods, the world doing its business around us. She didn't say anything more, and neither did I, in the only way I could not. But there was something between us then that hadn't been there before, and that I understood was not going to leave. After a while she put her head against my shoulder. I didn't move. I sat very straight and very still, the way you hold still when you've been trusted with something that matters. She said, I don't need you to have anything. I need you to be what you are. I turned my head and pressed my face briefly into her hair. She smelled of wood smoke and the particular sage they used in the camp, and something underneath that was just herself. I closed my eyes. Outside of two people I'll mention shortly, no one had needed me to be anything in a long time. I hadn't let them. I'd kept moving so they couldn't. And sitting there on that log with her head against my shoulder, something in me that had been held very tight for a very long time, the way you hold a cracked vessel carefully with both hands, loosened a little. Just a little, but I felt it. Chayton came to me that afternoon. He sat with me, and he had with him, folded across his knees, a blanket. Old, well-made, the kind of thing a family keeps for the meaning in it rather than the warmth. He set it between us on the log. He said, my daughter has made her choice. I nodded. You know what it means, he said, for her to choose a man outside the band. I nodded again. There will be people who say things about her judgment, about yours, about whether a man who cannot speak is a man who can provide. He paused. There will always be people who say things. I have been a chief for 20 years and I still cannot stop them saying things. He looked at the blanket. I looked at the blanket. What I can do, he said, is say what I say. He put his hand on the blanket. I have 2 sons, he said, Mato and one who died before he was a year old. I will not call you a son. You are a grown man and you don't need another father, and that would be, a slight pause, too much. I made the sound again, the voiceless laugh. But I will say this. He looked at me directly. You are a man I trust. You are a man I respect. And if my daughter trusts you and respects you, which she does, I have known her 26 years and she does not give that easily, then that is enough for me. He put the blanket in my hands. It was heavier than I expected, not just in weight in the other sense, the way certain things carry more than themselves. I held it and I looked at it and then I looked at him, and I did not have any way to speak what I felt. I held up my hand, the way I had the day we'd first sat by the fire, the way I held it when I had nothing to say but was still present, still here. He looked at my hand. He put his own hand against it, palm to palm, briefly. Then he got up and walked away. I sat there with the blanket across my lap, and the summer light coming down through the cottonwoods, and the whole weight of what had just happened sitting in my chest like something I'd been carrying for years had been put down and replaced with something else. Heavier in the good way, the way ballast is heavy, the way having something worth keeping is heavy. Mato appeared from somewhere and sat next to me and looked at the blanket and said, "He gave you that." I nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he grinned that wide, uncomplicated grin of his. "Good," he said, "good." And that really was all that needed to be said. The rest of that summer and into the fall I want to tell you as fragments, because that's how memory works, in my experience. Not a long story with a through line, but a collection of moments that you can sift through in the dark when the world gets quiet enough. Mato showing me how to ride the way the Lakota ride, not the way I'd been riding for 30 years, which was functional but not elegant, but with the seat and the balance that lets the horse feel like it's your own body moving. I was too old to learn it fully, but I got closer than I expected. Wombly Win correcting my map again, the third time, finding errors I hadn't known were errors. Chayton asking me once by the fire at night to describe by drawing the country I'd come through, the full 11 years of it. I drew for an hour. He watched without interrupting. When I was done, he looked at the whole sprawl of it and said, "A long way to come." And I thought, yes, it was. The first hard frost in October, and Wombly Win bringing me a coat that had been her father's, heavy elk hide with the fur still on the inside, the kind of thing that lasts 20 years. She handed it to me without ceremony, and when I put it on she walked around me and pulled the collar up straight with both hands, businesslike, and stepped back. "It fits," she said. It did, it fit perfectly. Mato learning to weld iron almost as well as I could. The day I realized I'd taught him everything I knew, and he'd be past me in a year. The band moving to the winter camp in November, a valley protected from the north wind, and me going with them. Not because anyone explicitly invited me or because I'd made any formal declaration. Because I was part of what moved. Because the camp moved and I was in it and no one questioned it, including me. Chayton one evening, late in November, sitting next to me as he sometimes did, and saying with a quietness that wasn't quite the usual quietness, "My joints ache this winter." A pause. "Don't tell the young men." I put my hand over my heart and tilted my head. "Your secret." He nodded. "You are good at keeping quiet," he said with that dry tone. I made the voiceless laugh again. We sat there, the two of us, while the fire talked to the dark outside the lodge opening, and the camp settled into itself around us, and I thought about the shape of the 11 years behind me and the shape of whatever was ahead, and I thought about the word my father, my actual father, long dead, a hard man who had one or two good things in him, had used when he thought something was the right kind of inevitable. "Fitting," he used to say, "that fits." The coat fit. The camp fit. The silence fit differently here than it had anywhere else. It had always been a wall I lived behind, but here it was just a thing about me, like the color of my hair, a fact of my particular make, no more and no less. And Wombly Win, when she came and sat near me that night as the fire burned down, not leaning, just near, her shoulder against my arm, the two of us watching the coals go from red to orange to the dark glow that's almost nothing and still something, Wombly Win fit. All of it did. I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll leave it there, because some things you keep whole by not explaining them. Spring came around again. The snow broke and the creek came up and the grass came back and the camp started the slow process of getting ready to move back to the summer ground. I was loading one of the pack horses. I'd gotten good at the Lakota way of doing it, the balance and the particular knots, and Chayton came and stood nearby, watching. He was having a better winter than the one before. Less aching in the joints, more ease. I'd made him a frame for sleeping that kept his back better supported, and I think that helped, though I didn't make anything of it. He watched me work. After a while he said, "You know, when you first came, when Wombly Win brought you in from the ford, there was a man in the camp, a good man, who said to me, 'This drifter will leave as soon as he's restless.'" I went on loading. I said, "Maybe, maybe not." I looked at him. "I was watching you," he said, "for the signs. A man who is going to leave is different than a man who is going to stay. The eyes are different, the way they look at the horizon." I waited. "Your eyes stopped looking at the horizon," he said, "about 2 weeks in." I thought about that. 2 weeks. about the time I started on the wagon wheel, about the time Motto started talking to me every day, about the time Wanblee Win began staying after she brought the bowl. A man who looks at what's around him instead of what's ahead, Chayton said. That man is where he is. I went back to the rope, pulled it taut and tied it off, ran my hand along the load to check the balance. Chayton put his hand on my shoulder, the same way he had on that amber evening, brief, deliberate. You are where you are, he said. He walked away toward the lodges, and I stood there with my hand on the pack horse's flank, and the spring light was doing that thing it does where everything looks newly made, washed clean, set out fresh, and Wanblee Win was coming across the camp toward me with that purposeful stride of hers, and Motto was somewhere behind her yelling something about a broken cinch ring, and the creek was up again with the snowmelt, talking the same way it had been talking when I'd sat on that log with her the summer before. I was where I was. After 11 years of going, that was everything.